corruption. Corruption adds to the cost of the economy in some sense, and therefore it leads to misallocation of resources also. Corruption by its very nature implies that the resources are being allocated not optimally but because of other reasons. I would therefore say yes, corruption is important. We should work towards establishing a society which is free from corruption. In fact, our whole idea of introducing the liberalization program was just that. Controls, permits and others breed corruption. And that is why we wanted to move away from a regime of controls, from a regime of quotas and permits. But the continued existence of corruption in our country clearly means that all the controls and all the restrictions are not gone fully. So what we really need to do is, one, create a system in which the possibility for corruption will be less. Two, create a system or an administrative mechanism which will not provide much scope for corruption. And thirdly, we should, wherever corruption has been detected, it is adequately punished. So we need a threefold approach in order to ensure that we have a system that is free from corruption.
Sir, I would like to bring to you, friend, of a great tension which is occurring in the NRIs, especially in the Gulf region. It is no doubt that NRIs, especially in the Gulf, have contributed to the economic development of our country. But the recent trend of nationalization which is occurring in the Gulf country, especially in Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, is bringing great attention to the Indian expatriates. Now, especially in Saudi and Kuwait, they are not providing the visa for the Indian expatriates, and they are not renewing the visas also. In this situation, when lakhs of Indians will come back to our country, is our economy suitable for absorbing this much highly professional Indians who will come back to our country? We might be within 2012 early itself. So it's a great tension which is within the expatriates, and especially in the Gulf country. So.
Well, the migration of Indian workers to the Middle East has been one of the important factors contributing to the strengthening of the Indian economy. Our people have been able to find employment elsewhere, and as they earn in the countries abroad, they have also been able to remit funds into India. Therefore, they have played a very important role. But it all, the extent of the NRI contribution will depend upon how the host countries feel their need. At one time, in the Middle East particularly, there was a need for labor of all types, from manual labor to the highly intellectual inputs like the software industry. But over a period of time, the Middle East countries have also built up their own capabilities. Therefore, what is really required is that we supply the kind of skills and the kind of expertise which the Middle East countries now need. So we need to adapt ourselves to their requirements. But I do believe that there is a labor shortage in the Middle East, and therefore there will be continued demand for labor from these countries, and that will be met from people from emerging economies like India, But India is not the only country which is providing the labor inputs in these countries. There are other countries competing with India in providing these services. Therefore, we really need to make the host countries like Saudi Arabia and others realize that the Indian labor has an important contribution to make. Therefore, we must make available the kind of expertise that they require.
Sir, what's your view on interest-free banking, which is introduced in Malaysia, and why can't it be implemented in India, as it reduces the burden on farmers?
Well, interest-free banking has been practiced in some countries, but it is in a very limited way. All that has been done is really to make the lenders share the profits of the activities which have been financed. Therefore, it is compensating the lender through the profit route. Therefore, I think the large-scale adoption of the interest-free lending is extremely difficult. In some areas it can be done. Take, for example, venture capital. Now, venture capital is also a form of interest-free lending, because in the case of venture capital, what happens? The venture capital company invests in the equity of a particular company and hopes that when that company really matures and is able to earn profits, it will take a share in the profits. So venture capital, if you want to call it, is a form of interest-free lending. But it is very difficult for a banking system in which the depositors who want to earn an interest on what they have deposited are to work on the basis of interest-free lending. I'm not saying that it is not possible. It is possible, and it has been experimented in some other countries. But its large-scale adoption, I do not think is possible in India.
Good afternoon, sir.
Yes.
Thank you for a wonderful presentation. I have 3-4 questions to you. The very first question is the present Prime Minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh, who was the cabinet minister in 1991, who played a very important role in the liberalizing the economy, which was an added advantage to the economy in growing the growth rate and everything. But the same person who's been heading the present government is liberalizing various other aspects also, like the petrol prices, the FDI, the foreign direct investment in the retail sector. But in my view, as a layman, when I see the petrol pricing disinvestment, which giving the control, as you said, the state has a controlling power. When the state is decontrolling themselves in the petroleum pricing, it is increasing in a dramatic way. So what is your opinion on that? Like deregulating the regulation by the government to the private people, it is increasing the prices day by day.
Well, as far as the pricing of petroleum products is concerned, decontrol is being advocated for the simple reason that we import 80% of our requirements. We do not produce enough crude oil in our country, and the crude oil is imported from outside, and therefore the retail prices at which the petroleum products are sold must reflect the international prices of crude oil. Otherwise, the subsidy burden will have to be borne by the government. We have borne the burden for some time, but the burden is increasing year after year as the crude prices internationally are rising. Therefore, the best course of action under the circumstances is to decontrol and let the oil marketing companies, most of which are actually in the public sector, to decide the retail price of petroleum products depending upon what is happening to the crude oil prices internationally.
Sure. But the another question is regarding the poverty line. As you said, according to you, the poverty line was defined in, it's according to the persons the poverty line has been defined. As a new planning commission has defined the poverty line in a different way, like 28 rupees per the BPL person, the new poverty line has created a lot of controversies in the economy. What's your opinion on that?
Well, I mentioned that. I mean, controversy is endemic as far as the poverty line is concerned, because there can be no agreement on what constitutes poverty. Your perception of poverty may be different from my perception of poverty. But what is really required is to see whether the number of people below a defined expenditure level have increased over time or decreased over time. And therefore, you need a certain line which may be updated according to the price index, but a poverty line which will indicate the progress of the society in terms of the people living below a particular level. Now you can decide 32 rupees per day is low and you want to fix it at a much higher level. But then there must be one common line from year to year, so that we can measure the progress of the economy in terms of the people living below the poverty line. Now this 32 rupees per day is also something that you should understand very well. This is 32 rupees per day per person. Therefore, we normally think a family consists of 5 people, father, mother and 3 children. So what we are essentially talking about is something like 160 rupees per day per family. So you have to think whether 160 rupees and multiplied by 30. What we are talking about is 4,800 or 5,000 rupees per month. Is 5,000 rupees per month per family an incorrect definition of poverty? Now we are talking about not a level of great comfort or anything. We are now defining the poverty. Therefore we are essentially saying a poverty, the poverty line means a family earning 5,000 rupees per month. And that is the way you should interpret it.
Thank you, sir. Another question, one more last question. One more last question regarding the... No, the last question, sir. Okay. This is what regarding the RBI, regarding the counterfeit notes as well as the terrorism. How far it is affecting the national growth rate?
Well, the counterfeit notes are circulating, but I think it's a minuscule proportion of the total currency in circulation. I don't think it is impacting the economy in a big way, but certainly we should ensure and see that there are no counterfeit notes, that there are no fake notes. But as of now, whatever estimates that I have seen puts these notes at an extremely minimal proportion. Yeah.
Good afternoon, sir. I have 2 questions for you. First question is our government is being criticized very badly for being concerned very much about the growth and very neglected about the inflation. As the chairman for economic advisory for the Prime Minister, what's your opinion about that? And my second question is since the last March, RBI has increased the interest rates for 13 times, and now it is telling they are not increasing the interest rates for at least for some time, then how they will control this inflation rate?
Well, a high growth and low inflation are our objectives or the major objectives of economic policy. We need the growth rate to be as high as possible. We want the inflation rate to be as low as possible. These are the objectives. And sometimes what happens is that in trying to control one thing, you may hamper or come in the way of the other. Since inflation was running at a high level, we decided at one time that the major attack should be on controlling inflation. And this might have had some impact upon growth. For example, when the policy rate of the Reserve Bank of India was increased, as I say, 13 times over a period of 18 months, it might have had some effect upon industrial growth. It might have had some effect or some impact upon the growth of manufacturing and other sectors. But you have to decide at some time which is the more dominant objective. I always give the example of a person who is suffering from high fever. We know that when a person is suffering from high fever and you administer, let's say, antibiotic, it will have some adverse effects. But if you want to control the fever, you have to give the antibiotic and at the same time reckon with the fact that there are some side effects. So in that sense of the term, yes, when inflation was running at a high level, we had to control it, and we knew the side effect, which was the impact on growth, but we will have to subsequently take care of it after we have controlled the fever, which is a high inflation. Your second point was on interest rate. Now interest rate, let us say, is one instrument for controlling inflation. When inflation is particularly triggered by supply side factors, we must focus attention on the supply side first. We need to ensure that the availability increases through imports if possible, or availability improves through better distribution. So we need to, as I mentioned earlier, we need to intervene. We have in the public distribution system fairly large stocks of wheat and rice, and therefore we should use the stocks of wheat and rice in a manner in which it can bring about a reduction in the food prices. So we had to raise the rate of interest because inflation is also, because inflation was at a high level. Look at yourself as a depositor. If you are a depositor and you are placing funds in the bank, you would also expect that the bank pay a high interest rate, at least to compensate for inflation. Therefore, the interest rate that you get on your deposits cannot be lower than the inflation rate. Otherwise, you are getting less than what you put into the bank. And therefore, the bank has also to charge correspondingly a higher lending rate. Therefore, one instrument for controlling inflation is the rate of interest, and that had to be increased in view of the fact that inflation was running above 9% consistently for several months. But it will be possible, as the inflation rate comes down, to bring about reduction in the interest rate. I do hope that the Reserve Bank will act in coming months, taking into account what is happening to inflation.
Sir, coming back to petrol, we see these days at every 2 day the petrol prices are increased. the petrol prices are increased. Then again after 2 days there are protests, and it's proudly broadcasted in media that government has decreased the petrol prices by 20 paise. Then again the similar thing continues for so many days. Is Indian government really helpless, or is there something else in government's mind? Second thing, sir, there has been recent debate over foreign investment in the Indian market. What is your view about it?
Now, on the first question, I have already answered. What the oil marketing companies have been given the freedom is to fix the price of petrol depending upon international crude prices. You must sometime watch the behavior of international crude prices. International crude prices fluctuate within a day and from day to day. And therefore, if the retail prices of petrol is to be adjusted according to the international prices of crude, it will have to be, it will go through a lot of adjustments. Sometimes it will go up, sometimes it will come down. So what the oil marketing companies have now decided is to not to make an adjustment every day, but do every fortnight. Every fortnight they will look at what is where the international crude prices remain and accordingly adjust the petrol prices. Therefore, you must get used to the idea of petrol prices rising and falling depending upon the crude prices globally. And in fact, in many of the Western world, the prices on petrol products change every day or every week. It is not as if the prices remain the same. Now, as far as the FDI in retail is concerned, I think the retail system that we have in our country, though widespread, has its own problems. The farmers particularly are not getting their due. Many times people talk about the fact that the farmer sells the tomatoes or potatoes at X price, and in the retail market the same commodity is sold at 5 times that price or 10 times that price. Therefore, our retail system needs modernization. Our retail system of marketing needs upgradation. Therefore, in this particular process, I believe that foreign direct investment in retail will play an important part. Therefore, in the modernization of the retail system in our country, FDI can play an important part. Let me say this. Even today, the corporates in our country are allowed to set up retail outlets. There is no bar against that. And the corporates have also done it. But this has not prevented the retail shop at the end of the street or at the end or at the corner of the street to vanish. What they call mom and pop shop still continues, and they will continue because they provide a certain amount of convenience to the consumers. They are near the place where the consumers live, and they have a personal contact with the consumers. All these will continue. Therefore, I do not think that FDI in retail will necessarily affect adversely the large network of retailers we have in our country. On the other hand, FDI in retail, to the extent to which they invest in the supply chain with respect to the food products, it may go to improve the conditions of our farmers.
Yeah, good afternoon, sir. So, as you know, service sector in India is one of the major contributors towards the economy of India. And, as everybody knows, service sector has already started reaching the saturation point, And the investment, if at all the service sector in India, reaches the saturation point, the major sector that India can look forward to is the manufacturing sector. But then the investment in the manufacturing sector, I guess, is comparatively lesser when compared to the service sector in India. So what do you think the government should do? What steps should the government take in order to keep up the economy of India intact, provided a condition comes where the service sector falls.
Well, I think he initially talked about the service tax, right? Service sector. So the service sector is critically important. After all, as the economies grow, they in fact move towards the service sector. In fact, if you look at the evolution of economies, you will find stage 1 in which agriculture dominates. Then they move to stage 2 in which manufacturing dominates. And finally you reach a stage in which the services dominate. Now many people think that India has skipped the second stage, moved from the first stage to the third stage. I understand the importance of manufacturing. I think we really need that the share of manufacturing in the total output must increase from the present level of 17 to 20% to a much higher level. But at the same time, we cannot decry the growth of the services sector. The services sector also provide the felt or satisfy the felt need of the customers. Therefore, while we should encourage the development of the manufacturing sector, while we should encourage greater investment being made in the manufacturing sector, we cannot decry the growth of the services sector also. In the final analysis, you will find in all economies, in the final stage, the services sector dominate.
Gratitude is